consultant, and I used to work for Zynga. Yeah.
Metrics. What?
Metrics.
So I just wanted to quickly find out, in the audience, do any of you have analytics in your games now? And anyone looking to add analytics to their games? And the rest of the people, I guess, just like being in our session. And are a lot of people here technical designers, programmers, designers, artists, other? All right. So hopefully that helps inform our answers. I don't know if it will.
Yep.
So I guess the first and probably the most important question is, what kinds of decisions can you make after you're looking at data analytics, or have you made in the past?
Yeah, so I think that what we can use our data to figure out is both how we can market better to players, and what kind of players we should be marketing to, and then once they're in the games, how we continue to keep them engaged, I guess. So there's a lot of factors there. But just for an example, we're going to talk about this later. But you can tell, if you look at the data right, you can figure out what kind of purchasable items you should be producing in games, because people are more likely to buy a certain category of item, for example. And you can also figure out what specific one you should be making. So you can say, okay, well, science fiction themed things sell better than fantasy themed things, and this character is more popular than this character, so we should make a science fiction themed piece of content for this character, and it will make us the most money. But otherwise, you're just throwing darts at a board unless you actually look at the numbers and figure out what you should be doing.
So this is the first time I'm publicly sharing kind of any of our data, and I'm glad it's semi-public. But what we do is we want to figure out how do we increase retention in our game. It'd be great if we have a good D1 retention, but ideally, what does that look like after 30 days? And that's really, really hard on mobile. It's really hard on Facebook because Facebook is failing. So what I want to do is encourage players to keep playing and not over monetize them, not constantly hit them up for purchasing, and make sure that the gameplay is designed in a way that encourages them to want to buy instead of having to be like 50% off. So I don't know when you want to show kind of that stuff, but we can come back to it.
Whenever you think it's relevant to the answer you're giving, just point and I will put it up on the screen.
Can you load the user query 1?
User query 1.
So I taught myself, with the help of Justin, who's in the audience, how to write queries. And basically, we have analytics for a lot of pieces in our game, not just purchasing, but also whenever a player finishes a level, we'll track whether they failed, lost, or quit. And using that, and this is just an example, an event, I blurred out the Facebook ID of how much information we can pull out about each player. So if you go to the second page, for example, you can see the tiny crystals is a real money purchase. I know that person spent money right after level 30. And I can go back and I can also see, and this is just one query, but we have queries like I can say, pull up this user, show me how many times they failed on these levels. And when I do that for a lot of users, I can say this level is legitimately causing people to spend money. And the more times you can do that, the more successful your game will be. But at the same time, you can also create drop-offs. I'm going to leave. Oh, thanks.
Yeah, so as it has been stated, and data and analytics is super important for like spend, monetary. It's a business. You need to make money to stay in business. But it doesn't even have to be just that. We used it on the game design side a lot as well, because oftentimes if you are not the target audience of the game you're making, you may not understand what is making these people tick and love what you do. But the data does that for you. Data is not inherently evil or good or bad. It's just data, and you can pull out so many interesting pieces of information from it. Like, let's say you're making Barbie Horse Adventure. I am not the target audience for Barbie Horse Adventure, but I can see everything that audience does love, hate, struggles with, all from the data, and that's invaluable. Like, we used it a lot for not just purchasing, for deciding what items to put in, but also then what our new content beats are going to be. Like, these are the kind of quests and stories and NPCs that our players like on Frontierville and Cityville 2. We absolutely use data for that kind of soft content, like for narrative direction, and it was invaluable.
So when you say you were able to use the data from that, is that, and this is kind of the next question, which is, are you saying you tried several options and you used that to help you decide between them, or you've noticed trends in the larger user database?
Trends. It's a business.
Trends.
You've only got so many. You only have so many resources on your team to develop content. We had to make a split decision usually in one day. We have 2 days to get out new content because our content cadence was so fast. We couldn't try lots of things. We didn't have the time or the money to waste on that. So we had to make sure that whatever we were going to push tomorrow was the best possible thing. So it was trend-based.
Yeah, just for an example for how data influences design on Smite, our most recent event in-game was called Jingchen's Mountain. It was a co-op PvE experience, kind of like MMO raiding. And it's the first time we'd ever done anything like that. Smite's always been a competitive versus game. But we looked at our data. We loaded up all of our players into Facebook and analyzed them because they know more about anybody than anybody except for maybe Google. And we found that the percentage of our players that also love MMOs was just through the roof. And we thought that if we made kind of an MMO themed event, it would be really successful. And it would also probably be successful in getting other people that like MMOs to come play Smite, and it was a hugely successful event. Everybody had a great time with it and said it was the best thing we ever did. So, that's just one example of how you can analyze what your players like and inform what you should be doing to make them more happy.
We're a really small team. We only have 4 people, so we are heavily focused on retention all of the time. Hi, I'd really like your team, and yours too, please. But at the same time, I think you can still notice trends even in your player behavior, like how many people are failing. Okay, well, are we okay with that? Are we okay with this many people failing at this level? Can we get them to the next level? We also notice purchasing trends. Like a lot of people, we have a keep going button. So when you run out of lives or moves, or not lives actually, when you run out of moves or time in a level, you can press keep going. You spend a little bit of money, and you'll be able to continue to play. It doesn't count as a failure. Well, a lot of people were like, I don't think that's going to work in an unblocked game. It's in match 3, but nobody had proven that would work in an unblocked game. So we set out to prove that, and we noticed that yes, it does work. So that's an example of a trend for us.
Yeah. And so you mentioned you don't have this larger player base, so less of a problem, say, if you have Zanga or high-res kind of numbers. But we, for instance, have a hard time telling what things are popular because we produce some content and there's not enough people buying it. Mm-hmm. So, how many responses do you really need to be able to pull an answer to notice the trend?
It depends. I think that as long as you feel confident with it, which is a horrible answer, but it really depends. There are some pieces of content, for example, that we'll make that we say, oh, this is not good. And we know, we kind of thought going into it might not be good, but we did it anyway because you have to try things. Probably a better example. So right now we're working on our acquisitions page for Smite and Paladins, where if you want to make a new account, you go, our ads send you here and you make an account. Some of our test versions of the acquisitions page, we can tell after 100 people hit this page that it is a total flop and nobody's converting off of it. Some of the pages, we have to run thousands of people to realize that it's a 0.05% improvement. But a 0.05% improvement isn't going to matter when you're dealing with a much smaller percentage, like total number of players, right? I think that when you're dealing with those smaller numbers, you should focus more on the things that are going to get you tens of percentage points of improvement kind of thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, can you load the FTU funnel? So for us, we do tests that are about 2,000 users a piece. It's easier on Facebook. You can buy installs, and a lot of people, I think, they look at buying installs as, oh, we should wait to buy installs until we have money and we know that the game is successful. You don't. That's crazy. What you can do is you can say, I'm only going to acquire this many users so that I can test this idea or this concept. I did this backwards because we use Delta DNA. You can do funnels in Delta DNA, but you can't compare funnels between the first and what?
You can't compare them?
No, you can pull any data that you want, but if I want to create a beautiful graph over time, over like 4 tests and show them across time. Also, it's backwards. So like day 1 is, sorry, day 1 is the light blue on the right and then going this way. So we're at T4 now. So each one of those, we don't consider test done until we've run 2,000 users through it. And then we'll compare like what the drop off is between. So like when we started, we had a 12% drop off between level 2 and 3. We were like, that's not good. Our goal was to get, and still is to get it to 5% between each. I don't know if that's crazy now that I've talked to you, but that was our goal, and we've gotten a lot better. So I'm proud of that.
Oh, that's a pretty chart. I am very happy with those numbers.
Do you want this?
No, there are some things I still cannot say.
Okay. But I also I get worried sometimes as a small team. Is 2,000 enough? Like. But that's all I can buy.
It's probably enough. Like,
okay.
I mean, we've run tests we've run tests. This is embarrassing. This is terrible statistics. That the in size was 100.
Wait, what?
Yeah, 100.
100's a lot of people sometimes. It depends on how.
it depends on what you're doing.
It depends on what you're doing. Some of our tests are pre-planned as opposed to after the fact, and those we've actually sometimes had to run power calculations on, which are really annoying mathematical equations, and you're like, you guess how big a difference there's going to be between the two, and you're like, oh, I only need an end of 100 because no one's going to like this one and everyone's going to like that for one, and by the way, that's not what happens. Like, the percentage is much smaller and you can't detect it, and then you need more people.
I mean, that's really small, but basically, like, we were trying to get that bar longer every time. It's conceptually how it works.
So one thing that we have never been able to solve, this is my, like, apparently, I'm going to just ask questions that I need to answer.
Totally.
And it's a problem that Molly, I think, also had, which is we had no idea. We look at numbers, we're like, well, this is... With a funnel, you can say this is the lowest number of any spot in our funnel. This is where we need to work. For the other ones, we have no idea if we're doing well or poorly compared to anyone else in the industry. So how do you...
They don't talk about it.
Yeah.
So they don't. The one nice thing is Apple just recently, because we have our most recent product is subscription based, has started telling us whether or not you are above the industry average in subscriptions. So we are. So we stopped thinking about that until that number goes down. But how do you decide what a good target is for anything?
That's a very open question. I mean, I think that the key thing is, at the end of the day, are you making money, right? So it doesn't really matter how good or bad your numbers are compared to the industry as a whole if you are covering your costs and making more money on top of that, hopefully, so you can afford to fund your next game, right? Mm-hmm. So, for us, as long as a player's lifetime value exceeds whatever we spent to acquire them, we're happy with that. Like, could it be better? Probably. It probably should be. Like, Hi-Res Studios, it kind of has a reputation of being very fair in our monetization policies. Like, you can buy all of the gameplay content for $20 or $30 depending on which game, and then you never have to pay us another cent. Beyond that, it's just, do you like the game enough to buy costumes? That is our entire monetization plan. So we're just trying to get people that like the game and keep playing long enough to buy costumes for a bunch of characters. That's literally our strategy. So if the game is entertaining enough to keep people attached to it long enough to make money, then thumbs up. If not, then we stop development. Or tweak it a little bit until we figure out we can't do it, and then we stop development.
There's no point in continuing to work on something that's failing. It's better just to start over.
Yes.
Can you do the Delta DNA KPIs?
Sure.
So I love this company. I used to use Google Analytics. So did Justin. He's sitting in the audience. He probably has bad memories about it. Oh, wow, it's really green. Yeah, it looks really different.
Very different, yeah.
But anyway, so this is actually from Delta DNA itself. They have a blog. It's a really great resource. You don't have to be paying for it. Actually, Delta DNA you don't have to pay for, period, until you have 10,000 users a month or 10,000 MAUs. So it's a great resource if you're new and don't know analytics tools. They also focus on games analytics as opposed to Google Analytics, which is more designed for web. They're trying, but it's not there. So as you can see, the percentage of people that convert to paying players on mobile and free-to-play games, this was a year ago. It's not even that high anymore. It's less than 2%. So if you're doing better than 1%, you're doing better. But largely what it means, you need to monetize the other 99% of players. And I don't want to talk about that right now. We can talk about that after she talks.
What was the question again?
How do you how do you decide on a target and figure out?
Yeah, I mean, honestly,
where your goals
it's
are gonna be?
like, seriously, there's going to be that one giant crazy hit on mobile, and luck of the draw, it's not going to be you, and that's okay. It's really, how big is your team, what's your overhead, and what do you need to bring in to keep your company afloat and to keep building forward and growing. You don't necessarily have to be pulling in $300,000 a day. You most likely do not, and if you do, I sure hope to God that you are. But for most smaller companies, it doesn't need to be anywhere near that big, so don't worry about, are you pulling in as much money as Supercell? That's ridiculous. Don't worry about them. They're different. It's fine. Look at your own numbers, your own business, and just make sure you're hitting those first and grow from there. It's okay. Not everyone is a hit. It's fine. You just have to be good enough.
So, okay, one thing that we talked about earlier is pulling in data from Facebook users. And there's Google Analytics that pulls some information from Google. What kind of external data sources do you guys use?
Yeah, so we use Facebook in terms of like external stuff. That's kind of the big one. We do use Google Analytics as well. A lot of our decision making, I guess, in terms of in-game stuff, we do through a tool called, we record stuff into our SQL servers, and then we query it through a program called Answer Rocket. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's relatively new. So if we can pull up one of my Answer Rocket graphs. So Answer Rocket, let's go with, that's good. Yeah, let's go with that one. Okay, so Answer Rocket takes what would be complicated SQL queries and turns it into natural language, easy for dumb marketing people to come up with queries. So like, for example, this one says Smite PC count of players by player level by player created date last 90 days. That's all I had to type, and it got me this. It takes a little bit to get it set up right. I'm not going to lie to you about that. But once it is set up right, like, we save so much time pulling statistics. So this graph was the last 90 days of Smite player levels. And the reason why I created this graph in the first place was because we had an influx of users from a new source, and we were kind of curious how they performed versus other users, and just kind of wanted to analyze those days versus other days. And I wrote this query, and it's a different way of looking at the data than we looked at it before. And as you can see it visualized, there's a huge cliff at level 1, so people play the first level of the tutorial, never come back. That's pretty standard and free to play. There's a cliff at level 5, which is kind of interesting until you realize that that's the level at which you have completed the entire tutorial system, like you've played every mode, and then it's like, okay, well, that was fun, and then you never come back to the game. But the one that surprised us is there's also kind of a cliff at level 9. So
maybe you want to point to those clips?
Yeah,
I can't find.
Sure. So yeah, so right here you see the darker colors. So the cell is darker if there are more people that got stuck at that level. So it's from level 0 to 30, and then this is just dates with the most current date is on the right. So people haven't had a time to get to higher levels because it takes time to play. So level 2 means, which is this first dark line here, is you played the first part of the tutorial, you played one match, and then you never played it again. Level 5 here, which is this second dark line, is you finished the tutorial and then you never came back to the game. And then level 9 here is this, you see, it's like just a slightly darker line, but it's darker than anything else around it. And in actual Answer Rocket, if I hover over each square, it'll tell me how many people are in each segment. But I just took a screenshot for this. And that level 9 cliff is something that we didn't realize that we had until very recently. So now we're working on ways to both figure out why there's a cliff at level 9. As best as we can figure out, that's when our matchmaking algorithm starts matching you against better players, and people are probably getting shit on and then realizing that they don't like getting shit on. But we're still figuring it out. And from this data, we know now that once somebody's level 9, we should probably send them some kind of communications via mailer or ad or something saying, hey, like the game gets harder, but you can be great or something, whatever. Sometimes you can't get the dev team to get a fix in, and you have to work around it through marketing. So these are the kind of lessons that we're taking, right? We can see that at level 2, you're laughing, but this is so true. Level 2, we expect people to fall off. There's only so much you can do there. Level 5, we probably need to prompt them again to say, hey, you finished this tutorial, play the real game. And then at level 9, we need to say, hey, please stick with us. And then also we need to smooth out the actual game. So and Smite's been around for years and is doing fine, and we still have these huge drop-offs at certain levels, right? So don't obsess too much with stuff like this. It really is money at the end of the day.
It's also terrifying, though, when you're like, why is everybody leaving?
Can I show 2 other answer rockets real quick, just since I have this here? And I talked a little bit about, go to the other one first. Okay, so this is for we'd lost it.
Oh, did we lose it?
Oh, we're back. Okay, cool. So this is for Paladins. This is calculate match count by God for source system equals Paladins PC since 9/15/2016. That's what I had to type in. And there's different ways of typing it. Like I could have also just said like Paladins PC match count by God since 9/15, and it would have done that too. Or last 20 days or whatever you want to do. It's a really cool system, but you can see that Victor, you can't really read it, but it says Victor, Kinessa, Cassie, Sky, Pip, I can't read that one, Fernando, Androxus, Bomb King, yada yada, right? So looking at all players, these are the number of matches played as that character. So you're like, oh, well, Victor is the most successful character. We should make a lot of content for him because a lot of people like that character and want to buy it. Now, if you look at the next one I have, so this is the same thing, but it's split by how much money people spend, right? So in free-to-play games especially, most of your money comes from your whales. And we define whales as people who have spent $100 or more in our games. We also have other categories. We have sharks, which is $30 to $100, and minnows, which is you've spent up to $30, not $0, but 1 cent to $30. And when you look at it this way, it's different. You see that like Cassie and Barrick, the bottom line here is whale. So Cassie and Barrick are the 2 characters that are played most by people that actually give us money. So we should probably really be making Cassie and Barrick skins. Like, we should not be doing, I'm not saying that Victor's not popular, like he's still here, but he's more popular with people that don't give us money than he is with people that do give us money. So we should optimize our content strategy for the people that are paying us.
Was the question like what third-party tools do you use?
It was kind of like internal and external data sources.
Yeah, internal and external data sources.
That's the way I interpreted it.
Actually, I have one quick follow-up to that, which is, do you worry about a feedback loop? Because if you create more content for the people who are spending money, and that's because that's the only thing you can be buying, etc.
Yeah, and that's actually why I didn't show the Smite version of this, because the Smite version of this is very skewed by who has the most content, and also Smite is skewed more by which characters are the strongest. So because there are so many characters and it's been around for so long and there's so much content to buy, that the characters that have the coolest skins and the characters that are the most powerful in the game at the moment are always at the top of the chart. When you look at it for the people that spend a lot of money, because the people that spend a lot of money are your most hardcore players that have been around for the longest generally. Paladins is new, and there's basically nothing to buy in the game, which makes me cry as a marketer. Right now, the only character that you can buy really a cool skin for is Cassie, and that's probably why Cassie is up towards the top. But beyond that, you can tell that the other data is probably pretty reliable. Cassie is literally the only character with a skin right now that's not a recolor. So we really need to make content and start selling it and make more money.
There's a picture, I think that's a Delta ZNA, like not just the query. It's the query. Yeah. No, not the mobile KPIs. It's transaction query.
Yeah.
So I did talk about this tool, but I wanted to show what it looks like on the left side. So it's our live. Also, you can have separate dev and live environments. It's pretty common. You don't want to mix that data. Your developers are going to create like 1 billion accounts, and yeah, it's going to be all wrong. So you can do user mining, you can write queries, you can tunnel in if you want to pull a lot of data. You're not going to get everything through the platform, but they have things like LTV predictors. If you don't know these terms, LTV is lifetime value of a player. It's basically the amount of money you get out of a user as long as they stay with you. Retention predictor is how well are people going to stay with your game over time, based on kind of how it's trending right now. Funnels are things you can set up based on custom events. So before we do anything, we create a matrix of here's all the custom events we want to make. We estimate how long it's going to take. I don't know if we're going to talk about that, but a lot of people at small companies will just be like, oh yeah, analytics, we'll add those in. And they don't take time and realize it's going to take several hours. But yeah.
Hours, not several months.
Yeah, days. Yeah. No. Yeah, that's what I mean. But per custom event. If you really want to get into it, each event is going to take several hours to implement. But yeah, this is what Delta DNA looks like, and that's primarily what we use. Also Facebook.
Yeah. Like a lot of bigger companies will have proprietary stuff, databases, queries that they build, but Delta DNA, Flurry, Google Analytics, there's a lot of data out there. Pick whatever works for you. Just because someone else using it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right tool for you. I've consulted with many companies that think, oh, well, they use this one, therefore we have to too. It's like, you can't afford $30,000 a year for this data. It will not help you. So really look at what you're getting on the back from your investment and start small. You can always change it later. It sucks, but yeah, just bear in mind the data is only as good as what your time and money that you're putting into it.
I'm surprised to hear that it takes you several hours to add an event, though.
It depends on what the event is. A lot of our events are actually pretty complex. This makes it look simpler.
It does.
But, and that's actually not on PrinceNap. It's on some of the other games I'm working on that are more like social networks, where we're actually very careful about how we estimate each event. So an event could take 2 hours, and I'm including QA. So we want to make sure that the event comes through and that it's properly posting the right data. And for example, this is on a client project, which I can't really talk about in too much detail, but we're pulling in custom question text and passing different choices and stuff for each event.
Okay, cool. I'll just say this for us: we tend to be we throw a lot of our stuff into SQL databases, and then I write queries, and then our art staff actually produces the visualizations because we find that a lot of times we have to share those with other people. So I'm going to show one of those if that's. We wanted to show how a heat map of how well people were brushing their teeth, which is we make Brush Up. You should download it. You should subscribe. You should never unsubscribe and give us $1 a month for the rest of your life. If everyone did that in this room and then told 100 of your friends to do that, we'd be very happy. So we at some versions of our game, not the version that you can download and should download and subscribe with, we had an instrumented toothbrush, so we could actually see how people were brushing their teeth in real time, and we just were curious where they were spending their time in the mouth, and so we gathered that data as a whole bunch of files, and then created a heat map, which is something that no one else had brought a visualization for. So I did.
I want to see the before. This is the after.
Yeah.
Oh, this is the after. This is after they played for 2 weeks. The before is before I've done this several times, but before, kids brush their teeth by going across the front, and then they push down across their non-dominant side, and they brush like that on those teeth, always on the outer surfaces. And our primary goal was, can we just even that out so that they brush the insides of the teeth,
Cool.
Yeah.
Heat maps work really well for something like this.
We tried just doing, there's columns of numbers here, things that didn't work. The heat maps came across pretty, this one made a little less sense to most people. It wasn't quite as visual. The heat maps worked well enough that we put it in our booth. So, okay, you're creating a custom event, let's say. What helps you inform you about what kind of data you want to capture for that?
So we're really bad at our jobs, and we don't really use custom events. We just so our games the development is driven by the developers, and as marketers, we have to beg them to put anything in the actual game that could possibly break the game or do something that would make people mad. So we don't have custom events in our games. The only way that we track people's stuff is looking at like what level they are, how many times they played a character. Like, we track everything that you do in the game, but then to back that out into what was the specific event that caused you to stop playing or something is really freaking difficult. And it's something that we're trying to convince our dev team to embrace more. But yeah, that's... For mobile, it's much more important. We did have a mobile game that came out last year, Jetpack Fighter. Once again, everyone, please download the game because nobody else did. It's actually really fun. It's kind of like a swipe to move platformer. It's fun, but nobody played it. And with that game, we did do custom events. It wasn't my team specifically that did that, but we put those in and figured out where people were falling off, and it was just everywhere because the game did not perform very well.
Oh, okay. I liked it. I played it. It was good. It's fun. So you were like, oh, it takes hours. Like, I'm a producer for a lot of my clients, so I'm going to tell them like realistically how much it takes. But honestly, like if you've implemented like the template events over and over again, it's not going to take you hours to do it. It does take a bit to post it. The first time you initiate a Delta DNA, you have to give it some time to actually post the data, but it's not as bad as Google Analytics. Google Analytics was terrible. Hope it's better now, but I don't use it anymore. But yeah, so when we write a custom event, we create the matrices and we'll say, this is all the game parameters we want to have. And sometimes you have to create custom game parameters. What the difference between an event and a parameter is, an event is, here's everything I'm going to send in an outline, and a parameter is one piece of that outline. So a parameter might be like the user ID, or it might be a text that you're sending. If you have, for example, players can create custom content and you want to be able to store that custom content in a database somewhere. Also, Delta DNA is hosted on AWS. If it matters to anybody, if you're familiar with AWS, it might make it easier. Stop blowing up phone. So yeah, so custom events are fantastic because you can post anything you want. That said, you shouldn't post everything you want. You shouldn't create events for everything. You should create events for things that are meaningful, because at the end of the day, you are still doing a transaction. You're still going to have to use internet. Technically, you just want to be very concise and decisive about making it. A lot of people are like, track everything, and that's a bad strategy.
Yeah, especially if you have like a crap ton of users with a crap ton of data, someone has to try to go through all that data and find meaning. And the more data there is, the more noise that is. And it becomes painful to find any kind of meaningful trend whatsoever. We would always custom event the shit out of our for2es, the first time user experiences, because that's where you lose most of your players. And that's where we lost most of our players. And you wanted to know why, when, where, have all that information at your fingertips. And then honestly, the rest of the game, sometimes for like really big content cadences, yes, we'd have custom events everywhere. But if it's little itty bitty drops, no, we didn't need them, so we didn't put them in. Not that important. So you really just focus on where you think the problems are first. If you have past experience from other games, look at where those problems were, concentrate on those areas first, and then, see what the data you do have is trending towards, and then go back, add events as you need them. Don't custom everything, and it's terrible, and too much data. Bad.
So let's say you did have a custom events and you had too much data. Did you try to compress it? Did you toss it away? How did you try to mitigate that when it happened? Did you just say, I'm going to start collecting less data in the future and I'm going to ignore everything that happened before that time?
Smart. Oh. You know how you get more projects? You just kidding.
We had an in-house analyst who just cursed at us weekly. So we just did horrible things that no one should do. This is speaking from experience. Don't do it. Because, yeah, that poor woman had to go through all of it. And she hated us and then would refuse to do things later. And don't make your analyst angry. They're your best friend. But, yeah, don't do it. Just don't do it.
If you make your analyst angry, and this works in anyone in the game development world, a bottle of booze is usually they no longer hate you all of a sudden. I forgot to pick up my girlfriend's badge, and I had to beg the Reg group to go in there and pick it up after they were wanted to close. Yeah, our queries would actually time out because it was trying to go through too much data, and you'd let it run for hours, and then it would just die. We have orders of magnitude fewer users, and we still have that problem sometimes. When you're writing custom SQL queries and you decide that you're going to put lots of joins in because everything was put into atomic tables, then that's Yeah. Stuff starts timing out. So I'm looking to see what other questions I had pre-planned, because I'm not very good at, extemporaneous thoughts. Actually, I did have one other big question, which is, I don't know how familiar you are with the term p-hacking, but it's, at one point in the 1990s, you would have made the most money if you looked at the price of butter in a Bangladeshi village, and it perfectly predicted the changes in the New York Stock Exchange 2 days later, because there's a million villages in the world and a million commodities, and one of those combinations is going to randomly align. So how do you know whether something's significant or just noise?
I don't know much about the price of butter in Bangladesh, but I think, with anything that you do, you have to triage, right? You have to figure out what the most important thing is to the success of your game, And at times that's making your existing players be worth more money. At times that's getting more players into your game in the first place. At times that's, keeping those players in the game. There's different steps for different things. And you need to figure out whatever the most important thing is for your game right then. And to a large part, you should know that, because that's the high level stuff. And then delve into the data and do analysis to figure out how to fix that problem. I don't know if that's actually an answer to your question, but I feel like something is important and it matters when it's affecting your ability to have a successful game, right?
I was just going to say, I just read a lot. I read everything. I read, when I'm not working, a lot of people will research their users and their audience up front, and that's great. You should totally do that. Don't just make a game. But people do that too. It doesn't work unless you're Notch. But I read a lot. I will constantly be looking for articles in gamesindustry.biz and just see if anybody will talk about this stuff. Because if you do, you can kind of get more awareness about what kind of trends are happening in the industry. Mm-hmm. And you'll find that a lot of people have the same pain points. It's panels like this. I'd love to do more of this.
And part of it too is if computers could build games and solve all the problems, we'd be doing that right now, and we'd all be mega blockbuster hit millionaires, and yay. But they can't. They can't think. They can't divine. That's why we have people doing this. And at some point, you have to trust your experience, your gut, your intuition. You know something is wrong if it's wrong. You may not know why or where, and that's what the data's for. But it's not a helpful answer, but you have to do some of the heavy lifting and use that intuition. Use your experience from past products. If you don't have the experience, go talk to other people. Some of them can't answer, but there's lots of people here who do analytics, and they might be able to have you thought of this? That was a huge pain point for us. Oh, that kind of stuff. It sucks, and it's not anything data driven, which blows for this panel, but that's why people are still better than computers at some things.
That's an excellent segue. So, if you have any questions, there's people who might be able to answer them in the audience. Oh, no, sorry. I guess I was trying to be too cute. No, at this point, we're going to toss it open to questions from the audience. Anyone have any questions about analytics?
I look really tired.
Yes, sir.
So what sort of cues do you look for to try and make sure that you're staying ahead of trends instead of just following them? We've all had the experience of going on Amazon.com, buying something, and then for the next 2 weeks they advertise that exact same thing back to you. How do you try and keep ahead of that, and can you get cues out of this data to try and be in front of the trends instead of just continuously following?
So for the people at home who wouldn't be able to hear that, the question was, how do you analyze the trends so that you find that you're ahead of them and not catching up to what people have just done and reading that as a trend for the future?
Well, with that specific example, it sounds like Amazon set up their Facebook ads wrong, because you can exclude audiences of people that have completed certain actions, and they should have excluded you as somebody who bought something.
Habitually, they don't.
Yeah, well, I've dealt with Amazon, and they're great people who I would expect to be on top of that. I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this. Sorry. I got thinking about the face. I spent a lot of time dealing with Facebook ads. A big part of my job is digital advertising. So I got thinking about on tangent. I forget where we were going with this. What was the question?
So the question was, how do you figure out if you're observing a trend that's about to emerge versus you're watching a trend that kind of played out? Or
yeah, I think that generally speaking, if you're not one of like the first 5 people to do something, probably the first 3 people to do something, then you're past the wave of going to be a success off of it. It's kind of a rough rule of thumb.
We actually outline the strategy that we're going to take when we do our analytics tests. So for example, in 2014, we had a bunch of people play the game here, and that was really helpful. So we had all this qualitative data from people about level 3 is really freaking hard. You should fix it. And we did make changes, but it wasn't enough. And that's why you saw what you saw. But when we were able to then cross-reference that qualitative data with our quantitative data at level 3, and so we knew that wasn't a trend because we could compare those, or we knew it was a trend because we could compare those 2 things. I would also say, if you can buy users and you can do the installs cheaply, you should do it because they're not going to be biased players. That was the big thing for us. People always do family and friends. Family and friends are not going to give it to you real, and data always will. It will not lie. So we bought users in the Philippines. They only cost us 17 cents. That was wonderful. But also you have to then make sure you look at the different demographic areas when you soft launch because your data is not going to be the same. So for example, we also still ran ads in the UK and brought in 2,000 users from there. They were more expensive, but it was still really worth it. So that's how we knew what was trends versus what wasn't.
And as Molly said earlier, if you're looking for larger industry trends, just stay on top of larger industry trends. Read, look to see what your competitors are doing. All that stuff is out there. And if you just live in your own little company bubble, you'll miss everything that's happening. So, even if it's just devoting an afternoon a week just to see what's happening out in the ecosystem, just, keep on top of it.
So one thing is, if you're going to talk to family and friends, it's never your game. It's always a friend's game that you need help breaking the news to him of everything that's wrong, because they will help you rip apart your friend's work. And the other is, if you're looking for information about proxy populations, which I think is part of what Molly just said, there's a talk at 2 called Making Plans into Planes by Jacobson, who I work with. And we had to figure out how Boeing engineers were going to react to the game. It would cost us $100 an hour or something to put Boeing engineers through it. People on Mechanical Turk cost, I don't know, it's not nothing, but it's darn close comparatively.
Wait, you're saying proxy? You ran a proxy and you...
No, proxy users. We ran a small number of Boeing engineers through, and we ran Mechanical Turk people who were much cheaper through, and we decided whether or not the Mechanical Turk people we could give them longer experiences and get similar answers to what we expected the Boeing engineers. So this is, instead of going out and talking to a bunch of, let's say you're trying to make a game for children, walking up to a bunch of children and asking them questions is difficult to do, especially if you don't like the outside of jail cells. If you like the outside of jail cells, not the inside. But maybe it turns out there's a fan community that happens to like the same kinds of things. So can you use those instead? Mm-hmm. Anyone else have questions? Okay, so have you found, speaking of proxy people, have you found any benefit to using the analytics from your internal developers? Because as you said, there's an internal test collection of events. Have you found anything with as your QA testers are going through something, any value to those?
I can see where stuff is broken. That's probably it. Because all the other stuff, we literally create fake accounts over and over and over, and it's not right. It's not reliable at all for keeping anything that would be a benefit for when you launch. You have to use unbiased testers.
Yeah, I mean, if you're the designer, you made this stuff. If you're the programmer, you coded it. At some point, you are an expert at your own game, and you can't unexpert yourself. There was actually mentioned about that earlier today. And so, yeah, and developers are dirty, nasty cheaters. So we would all give ourselves 3 million gold. And you're like, I totally played legit, though. It's like, no, all that data's crap. I mean, you can find bugs, you can do play testing, and you should do that internally, but there's no, you can't overstate the importance of actually finding people out in the wild who have never seen your product before and using that data alone. Please keep it separate. So important.
Okay.
So, question. So, one of the things we did for our new game, Paladins, we advertised our basic Paladins artwork, same piece of artwork, that we knew had performed well to current players. Basically, first we advertised it to current players. And we're like, this is a piece of artwork that resonates with our current fan base. Then we went through on Facebook and we advertised it to as many small little sub-segments as we could to realize like what kind of players were interested in this based on our small initial subset of people that had played the game. You know, we'd had a few thousand people in the game and a few thousand fans on Facebook kind of thing. And, you know, we found, okay, well, players that like anime, or, you know, people that like anime are more inclined to like our game. You know, people that like X competitor game are more inclined to like our game. And we learned some really interesting things through that in terms of which games that we thought were competitors but really aren't, and which games we had no idea were competitors but really line up really well with the same player base. And then you can make more inferences from that on how you should be developing the game and targeting your advertising. Is that something that you guys have done in your own positions?
Yeah. Well, I know she's going to say Zynga does that all the time. Or Zynga did that all the time. Yeah, we did too. I mean, we would run like, oh, you know, we want users who play Candy Crush Saga. Or the problem is there aren't a lot of unblocked games. Like none of the social games companies are making unblocked games. I don't know if it's not a problem. It's an opportunity. That's why we did it. But at the same time, like the users who play Match 3 aren't necessarily the users who play unblock. So we also looked like at hidden object games and we'd target those different audiences. And eventually I found a couple of ones that worked. It's expensive, so you know we only do as much as we can. But yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. We also do really crazy things, not even just ads, but we even like did crazy tests like that for like what the title of our game should be, the logo shape, and see what's actually getting more click through, all those ridiculous things, because that is the first thing players see of your game. It's the logo. But yeah, so and also don't cannibalize your own player base. This is something we failed at big time at Zynga. So we're like, oh yeah, these games are all like, you know, our games too. They're competitors, but what players' time is finite, and if they're only going to play 1 or 2 games per day, it's better if they play 1 or 2 of your games, and you're not actually just recycling your own player base into all your games, because eventually they get bored and drop off. So just be cognizant of that. If you're making the same kind of game over and over and over again, you're actually starting to cannibalize your player base, and you're not actually competing anymore. It's bad.
So, okay, you subdivided groups, players into people who like anime, people who didn't. Earlier we saw you subdivide people into like minnows and sharks and whales. So how do you make a decision about how you're going to take this large population and what can inform someone who wants to start subdividing?
Well, I think the most obvious subdivisions to start with are, you know, people that have played, like if you have a max level, you know, people that have played through the end of the game versus people that haven't, you know, people that have gotten 50%. So you divide by playtime, you divide by spend for internal people, and then for external research, I think it's important to look at, like I said, the games that you think are competitors, interest groups that you think might overlap, and just kind of some random things that are also like really big games that have kind of a defined audience. So like, for example, Minecraft. Minecraft and Paladins cross-index really well, which is not something that you would assume, probably, but Paladins has kind of a cartoony fantasy thing going for it that I guess appeals to younger gamers who also like Minecraft. So that's, you know, an example of an insight that we got by seeing how we performed against Minecraft that we didn't really think about going into it. But I think that in terms of existing players, it's time and money. In terms of external players, it's, you know, the key competitors and other key industry games that are kind of like tent poles in various areas. You know, like, do we compete against, like, not Tetris, because we are in a puzzle game. Like you wouldn't assume. But do we compete against Final Fantasy? Do we compete against Madden? Right? Like these are different genre games, but sometimes there can be more overlap than you would think into this certain type of player, and by hitting kind of the key tent poles in those industries, in those genres, you can check that.
Can you load the end of level PNG?
There's two.
Yeah, but so I was actually going to use this to talk about smart ads, but I don't know if there's time. I mean, if you go to the next one, basically, just really quickly, what smart ads is we would the 99% of players that I talked about. So when you run out of moves, you can now watch ads on mobile instead of on Facebook, which you can't. Facebook does not have good game rewards ad services anymore because they changed their ad policies 2 years ago. So ad providers don't actually like them, and that's why they're kind of falling off the platform. But just so you're aware, if you want to do this type of stuff, it's better to do it on mobile. But if you go back, in order to come to this art style, we kind of did a lot of testing. I think you have to do it via your advertising, but your advertising is formed by your art style, and this is way more of a marketing and branding thing, which is probably more Kat's expertise. But I would say testing and make sure your game also matches your audience is how you would come back and make sure your ads are going to work as well. Because ultimately, you can target women who are over 35, which is what we looked at, but you still need to talk to women who are over 35 and make sure that they actually like it and in person and figure that out.
Okay, just one second. Just quick to note on that. I totally agree. Has anybody here played Atlas Reactor? No? Yes? So it's a turn-based strategy team multiplayer game. It's actually really fun, but I was getting ads for it that said, play the hot new MOBA. Right? And I love MOBAs. So I downloaded it and I played it. And I'm like, this is not a MOBA at all. And I stopped playing it immediately. So they succeeded in getting me to click on the ad, but my actual performance once I clicked on the ad was really bad. So if you only look at certain aspects of results, you aren't going to get the full picture.
What do you think of League of Angels?
Don't start me on League of Angels. League of Angels is one of the many games that has stolen art from us, in addition to many other people. And yeah, it's a really don't look it up. You're gonna waste your time. And I'm sure they have the same problem. They can get people in, but are they actually able to keep them? Probably not. They must be making the money though, because they have enough money to keep spending on advertising. Yeah, really bad advertising.
We actually had that same discussion because in Google you pay per click, and so we were talking about, we were trying to get the cheapest clicks, and we've tried to refine our metrics so that instead it's the highest conversion rate once you get to a click, because into a paying customer, because obviously I can trick you into downloading something. That's pretty easy, installing it on your phone.
Yeah. Well, and along that same line, for Paladins, we were really bullish on Peruvians because we could get really cheap click from Peruvians, but over the course of the past couple of weeks, we found that Peruvians actually convert into downloading the game at an exponentially lower rate than every other country that we've dealt with. And I don't know why this is, but the Peruvians love clicking on our ads for Paladins, but they don't actually download the game. It's this weird outlier, and we were like, yeah, this is great. We should throw more money at Peru. And then we step back and look at the download rates, and we're like, oh God, this is awful. We've been wasting all this money. It's just, you have to really, you can't look at the first level. You have to dive into it.
I want to tangent off of that because we really like Italians. Oh yeah. But it turns out we were doing WebGL, and WebGL last year everyone was like, we're scared to do WebGL because it's hard and cloud storage. So anyway, we did a WebGL game, but only one a version of Chrome. You have to have the latest version of Chrome to really be running WebGL stable. So we liked Italians, but we would start to get comments that are like, this game doesn't load on my machine. It's because they're running a really old version of Chrome. So the sometimes when you target countries, they're not using the same browser platform. You run into those issues, and it's not worth it.
We like the Netherlands. I don't know why, but for some reason they like our games, so we love them. But we don't have our games in 8 languages or 9 languages, because English is also one. It's not in Dutch, so I guess they're playing in English or German. But it made us wonder if we should really change languages.
Yeah, well, along those same lines, Paladins got picked up by a lot of Korean media last week, and we've had a huge influx of Korean players, and the game's not in Korean. And we're wondering if it's worth, translating into Korean to build off of that momentum. But I mean, that's a huge expense. And it's possible that it's just a flash in the pan. So, you have to, at a certain point, you have to pick a strategy and kind of stick to it, especially with translation stuff, man.
I really cannot comment on that.
On which country you love?
Country.
No. Yes, sir.
What tools do you use to run your analytics and to process them?
So what tools do you use to run and process your analytics? So we do a lot of SQL queries. We push to a SQL database. It is the least exciting way to do it. It is not the funnest. It's probably not a good way to do it at all. But it tied in well with the rest of our account system. And honestly, I'm going to fix that as soon as we have enough customers that it's worthwhile.
Yeah, and we push everything into a SQL database and then pull it out either through Answer Rocket or Tableau, which are both just data visualization tools. And then we also look at Facebook results and Steam charts and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of actual tools that we use, Tableau and Answer Rocket are the two.
SQL queries. Yeah, I'm not really going to say anything different. But also, the Facebook has really nice charts already. So if you are dealing with someone who's like a stakeholder who really needs to see graphs and doesn't want to look at just data, then I would definitely graph it out or find a tool that will graph it out for you. And all of the platforms do that already. So it kind of depends on what kind of data you want and who you're working with and how you want to show it.
Sequels.
I just wanted to say, this is actually something we created from a SQL database, and it was a pretty graph, because we had to show it to people who were giving us money, and they wanted to see how we were determining where we were learning, how players going through the game were learning or not learning. So we tried a bunch of different visualizations internally with hallway tests on random people who didn't know our game, and then settled on something that would convince them to give us more money. Ultimately unsuccessfully, but not because of this graphic. We made it to the next level because of this graphic, I'm convinced. But one of the neat things we did here, and since it's up, is we tracked, it was an educational game, so we divided the world into learners and non-learners, and we saw where the paths that they took through the game, and so we could see like which remediations were helpful and which ones weren't. And so we were able to, we changed the game dramatically and were able to improve the score. But one thing we couldn't find in the data was everyone started missing this one concept. And we couldn't find any tracks where they were taking different choices. And it turns out the tutorial had a bug in it, where we were teaching them the wrong definition of terms. And so we spent, I can't tell you how many weeks looking through this data trying to figure out where we went wrong. And it's like, oh yeah, the tutorial, because we don't bother taking everyone takes the identical paths. It's true.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
What is the most shocking thing you've ever learned through your first time user experience through your day?